Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Nicole, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Global WASH Cluster Climate Change and WASH Working Group webinar. Before we get started, I would like to invite you to take our two-question poll. You should see it pop up here on your screen. This webinar is available in English and French. For interpretation, you can click on your Zoom toolbar and select the language that you would like to hear. You can also download the slides in French by following the QR code or clicking on the hyperlink that will be shared in the chat box. If you are following in French, you will follow along the webinar on your own screen. So great. If you are just joining us, welcome. Please go ahead and take a moment to complete our short poll. It looks like we have about 100 people who've joined us so far today. A lot of you coming from NGOs, as well as public international organizations. I still see a few more people joining, so just a reminder that interpretation is available. You can click on the bottom of your screen and select the language that you would like to hear. The slides are also available in French. You will download the file and watch it on your own screen, as this screen will be in English. Great, I think we can go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Today, we will begin with an introduction, followed by speakers from organizations that have developed and used the resources that you will find in the Climate Change and WASH Toolbox. We will then have a discussion and Q&A session where you can share your ideas. Throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to share any questions you might have for the working group or for the presenters. And we also encourage you to share your experiences by using the chat box function. So again, my name is Nicole Weber. I am your moderator today. I lead the Strengthening Workstream under the WASH Cluster Climate Change Working Group. The webinar is being organized in collaboration with the USAID BHA-funded Capacity Strengthening Research and Learning Activity ProWash and Scale. I'm pleased that today we have speakers from IFRC, the Uganda Red Cross, IOM, and the REC Coalition. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of these speakers right before their presentation. So before we hear from the presenters, I would like to take a couple of minutes to introduce you to the toolkit. The toolkit concept emerged during the initial phase of our working group. We assessed existing climate change resources that could be helpful for WASH practitioners. As we started our web-based searches, we quickly recognized that there's a wealth of materials that are already available. So to develop the toolkit, we conducted web-based searches and gathered recommendations from the Climate Change WASH Working Group members. We identified over 200 resources, of which about 35% were deemed as potentially relevant for capacity strengthening. Our capacity strengthening work stream then reviewed resources based on criteria such as relevancy, applicability for emergency partners, availability of the latest versions, use of evidence, and more. I want to highlight that this toolkit is version 1. You may be aware of other resources that would be good to include. You might know from our sector that information sharing is sometimes fragmented and resources can be found in many different places. So we want to hear from you. What else would you like to see in the toolbox? And later in today's session, I will share a QR code and a hyperlink where you can share additional resources for us to consider in the future editions. This toolbox is designed to support practitioners in several ways. It's really focused on efficiency and enhanced access. It consolidates resources from many different organizations, allowing you to have one place to look for climate change and WASH relevant resources. It also supports capacity strengthening through providing opportunities for professional development and to enhance knowledge and skills in face of compounded challenges by climate change. It also helps us avoid duplication. This exercise allowed us to see what already exists and allows us to focus our future efforts on innovation and new areas of capacity strengthening rather than developing, again, the same resources that exist. So now we will take a closer look at the toolbox. The toolbox has 6 different chapters: guidance and planning resources, online courses, context-specific resources, facilitator and training resources, webinars and recordings, and services. When you have a chance to access the toolkit, you will see that you can click on each of these different sections, and it'll bring you a menu of resources that you might want to consider using or adapting for your specific content. So today we will spend some time actually looking at these resources. And to start, I'm pleased to welcome Farah Salam, IFRC Water and Climate Officer with IFRC Geneva. Farah has been with the Red Cross Red Crescent movement since 2015 and has a background in environmental science, health, and washing. She is now responsible for bridging the gap between the WASH and sectors. Directly after the presentation, we will hear from Emmanuel Natale, who is the manager for climate action and environment at the Uganda Red Cross Society. He provides technical and programmatic leadership in developing anticipatory humanitarian action systems. He oversees the climate unit focused on climate science, adaptation, and integrating cross-cutting themes across the URCS departments. So today he'll complement the toolbox presentation by FRC by sharing some experiences specifically from Uganda. So I'd like to welcome Farah now to share their resources.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our colleagues joining us from wherever you're based. Thank you for joining this webinar, and thank you Global WASH Cluster for organizing and hosting it. My name is Farah Salim. I'm the Water and Climate Officer at IFRC Geneva. I will be speaking a bit about some of IFRC's resources and tools, and I'll be representing the 191 national societies that make up our Red Cross Red Crescent movement. But before we go too deep into each tool, I'd like to quickly mention that we have only selected a few of our tools and guidelines to be showcased here, and you can find many more on our website. I'll drop the link in the chat at the end. I also want to mention that all these tools and guidelines are free to use, open sourced, and many of them are available in the 4 official IFRC languages: English, Arabic, French, and Spanish. It would also be beneficial to note that these tools and guidelines were developed by IFRC with consultation, input, and feedback from our regional and national offices. So in addition to them being available in multiple languages, most of the tools are contextualized to fit specific areas, cultures, and scenarios. Of course, no guide can cover it all, so if you find a tool that can be useful, that doesn't quite fit the context, feel free to take it and adapt it and mention IFRC as your source. The first resource I'll be talking about is this Guide to Climate Smart Programs and Humanitarian Operations. It's available in English, French, and Spanish on our website and is currently being translated into Arabic. The guide is meant to be used by staff, program planners, and decision makers to help them ensure that their programs take climate into consideration. Far too often we see excellent initiatives for WASH interventions that exclude climate from the planning phase or have it as an afterthought. These projects tend to not withstand climate-related hazards and disasters. This guide includes case studies, program design, and implementation guidance with the objective to achieve climate change adaptation, mitigation, and environmental mainstreaming. This next resource is a sector-specific guideline for managing solid waste in emergencies. This is another topic that is often neglected or not considered to be a priority. Even when solid waste management is taken into consideration, it's often just one component that's included, which is affected communities are producing waste and we need to set up collection points and maybe recycling to ensure we don't have breeding sites for vectors that can spread wash-related diseases. Which is of course a valid concern, but it's leaving out the many other types of waste that have an effect on the environment and the people affected. This guide highlights the different kinds of waste that exist in emergency settings, like emergency waste, such as debris or construction waste that's left on site, relief waste, which is waste that's generated by relief efforts, like logistic waste or waste generated by deployed personnel, and hazardous and medical waste generated by medical centers and healthcare facilities. This guide offers practical, sector-specific guidelines for managing solid waste in emergency contexts to improve environmental sustainability and health outcomes. It also highlights the many different disposal methods that can be used in an emergency setting, from landfilling to organic waste recovery and incineration. The third resource here is the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. The guide is available in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic and is tailored to humanitarian professionals working in disaster risk management. Green Response is all about improving the environmental sustainability of humanitarian work and avoiding, minimizing, and managing the damage we cause to the environment and climate. In many cases, some of our interventions, specifically WASH interventions, help a lot of affected people, but indirectly damage the environment while doing so. Green Response requires humanitarian workers to consider environmental risks, the environmental impacts of a crisis, and the potential environmental impacts of our humanitarian action. We must integrate these risks and potential impacts into every stage of our work, from preparedness to monitoring and evaluation. This tool offers sector-specific guidelines on greening the response. You can find case studies, success stories, and recommendations that you can use in your specific projects. This guide aims to provide a better understanding of green response and offers practical guidance on improving environmental sustainability in projects and humanitarian operations. And lastly, I want to talk briefly about the IFRC Climate Training Kit that was designed by IFRC and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center and is available to everyone for free on their website in English, Spanish, and French. The kit has been developed to support capacity building on climate risk management and policy dialogues. It aims to help trainers and facilitators shape interactive training events or workshops and tap into existing knowledge and tools within the movement. The kit contains 5 modules and is split into sub-modules addressing specific topics for different training purposes. IFRC's e-learning platform also has a course on climate science, climate advocacy, and climate action, and is a complementary, more traditional e-learning course. I'll also drop the link to the e-learning website.
Hello, thanks for logging in today. Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Intale. I'm the manager for climate action and environment from Uganda Red Cross. Today, I will share some bit of insights of climate change and WASH from Uganda. To begin with, Uganda, like many countries in Africa and globally, is dealing with the impacts of climate change, which are largely manifested through extreme events, extreme climate-induced disasters across. And Uganda Red Cross has been quite instrumental in supporting the communities to deal with the impacts of the climate crisis, but also working alongside the government, the climate change department on different aspects of adaptation and mitigation at the community level. So the Red Cross has a climate action and environment unit, which is supporting to mainstreaming issues of climate and environmental change across all programs of URCS, and also building capacities, human resource, and then partnerships, and also supporting to implement specific activities at the community level. And we've piloted anticipatory action approaches since 2015, and now we've scaled them up as part of our disaster risk reduction efforts across various communities. But if we talk about communities in Uganda, and this is not unique, we are referring to rather a complex ecosystem for both climate action, DRR, and WASH programming. And our approaches have been largely looking at a holistic, inclusive, and adaptive kind of programming, because we are referring to various socioeconomic factors, social cultural factors, economic disparities, even within the same communities, diversity of stakeholders, environmental variability, political dynamics, information gaps, which are all contributing to the varying levels of adaptive capacities, even within the same networks or the same community settings. So we've adopted approaches like for climate information, like community radios, which we install across various communities to ensure that this climate information is able to reach even the most vulnerable person. And these approaches are able to reach remote and rural areas. We've seen that they're trusted so much by the communities, familiar voices, and also real-time and cost-effectiveness versus the other conventional ways of disseminating and owning information. But also you look at in some of these areas that actually need this information have a significantly low levels of literacy and information coverage from the Met. So we are part of the Uganda National Metro Authority Climate Outlook Forum, where we receive climate information. We interpret it and cascade it down to communities using some of these mechanisms like our community radios. The other bit on WASH, also supporting communities. This is largely in refugee settlements and host communities. Uganda has an open door policy for refugees. We have a significant number of refugees from South Sudan, our neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. So as part of our efforts to improve access to safe and clean water, we're using solarized water treatment plants. But the main focus of these plants also is on community empowerment, where we have these water user committees that are formed that include different people with special needs, and they are trained on maintenance, contamination prevention, and we also have C2 community-based kind of sustainable mechanism on how they sustain some of these interventions. But what we see here is the impact goes beyond just access to water, but also other components within these settlements and host communities, like sanitation, is to increase the discrimination of these communities. When these communities come together, they discuss things beyond just maintenance and looking after the water plant, but also other things that affect the community, and also that lead to building community resilience. And the other bit still on capacity across for staff, volunteers, and the communities. We've had a couple of sessions with these communities, these community water user committees on water quality assessment, regular water testing, hygiene awareness, promotion, and we've seen cascading benefits of these trainings across these various communities that will focus these interventions, but even the communities which are not specifically targeted for these interventions. And lastly, the other approaches that we look at from within Red Cross and been quite instrumental to ensure that no one is left behind in the face of climate change and WASH. One is community engagement and accountability, the approach that we largely use to be able to get our community feedback on both programs, interventions, but also other drivers of vulnerability within these communities. We've supported a couple of communities and districts to come up with what we call the Mount Hazard District Contingency Plans and community action plans. What we see, these plans are the first line of both disaster risk reduction, but also dealing with the impacts of climate change adaptation at community level. And these are linked to enhanced vulnerability capacity assessments that are also conducted across various communities, cash and voucher assistance, and these community-based disaster risk reduction groups. So this is just to paint a picture of what we do, and thanks to the organizers. Over to you for any questions and feedback. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Farah and Emmanuel. Both are online today and happy to answer your questions using the Q&A function. I want to thank Farah for sharing an overview of the IFRC resources and Emmanuel for sharing some concrete examples of community engagement and capacity strengthening and what that looks like for the Uganda Red Cross Society. Many of the resources presented are in the toolbox, and we can ask more questions during the Q&A. Now I'm pleased to introduce Alberto, who is the Solar and Energy Manager at IOM. Alberto is unable to join today, but he is available via email for follow-up questions, so please also do ask your questions. Alberto has over 20 years of experience in the WASH sector, managing projects in urban, rural, and displacement camp settings. He has been involved in the mainstreaming of solar energy in the global WASH sector, engaging over 270 organizations in 70 countries. His background is in physics, water management, hydrogeology, solar energy, and climate change. He is passionate about the WASH, energy, and climate change nexus and how to support partners to operationalize programs and policies to address these issues. We will now hear from Alberto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alberto Ibañez Dario, and I'm a solar energy and WASH program manager working with the United Nations Agency for Migration, also known as the International Organization for Migration, or just IOM. I'm going to briefly introduce some support services that make now part of the Climate Change and WASH Toolbox and that are openly accessible to anyone interested. These services were originally created as products of something called the Global Solar and Water Initiative, a project that had been running with funding from ECO and BHA from 2016 to nowadays. One of the aims of that initiative was to support WASH stakeholders in their efforts to pilot or scale up the use of solar energy technology in their WASH projects around the world. So the first support service available that I'm going to introduce is a solar technical helpline. This helpline is managed by IOM together with a group of engineers and experts working at different private sector manufacturers and academic institutions with expertise in water and solar energy. The large majority of queries received up to now are related to the use of solar energy and water pumping. And a minor number of queries are related to solar powering of devices like chlorinators, number of tools, etc., and solar lighting. Queries range from simple technical issues to things related to design of complex multi-pump solar schemes, recommendations and access to solar pumping design software, best practices in operation and maintenance, review of design and tender documents, etc., just to name the most popular. The solar helpline has been already contacted over 800 times by more than 200 WASH organizations, a bit all over around the world. So if you or your teams need a second opinion or some kind of support related to solar energy and WASP projects, you can just make use of the helpline by sending an email to the email address you see there, solarquery@iom.int, and then we will see the best way to go about your needs and support you for your project. The service is free, it's anonymous, and the average response time is 3 working days. Now, for the second service available, let me tell you that from 2016 all the way to 2021, the Global Solar and Water Initiative ended up almost centrally focused on issues related to solar water pumping. Yeah, because that was the area where the biggest gaps and opportunities were identified, and also because most of the requests from WASP engineers from all organizations were related to this issue. So the second service offer is a free access to a 3 to 5 days long solar water pumping training that covers introduction, design, operation and maintenance, monitoring, and financial analysis of solar pumping schemes. A training can be organized at any moment, depending on how many people and organizations are interested at a given time. And normally it's required to have at least 15 to 20 WASP engineers as participants coming from 7 or 8 different organizations. The most common case is that it happened at the country level. So at the request of a person, a brief introduction of the training can be organized for the WASP platform in the country. And if there is enough interest at country level, a training is organized. And the good thing is that after the training, partners have technical helpline. So training and helpline are complementary, and they have proved to work very well together. If a group cannot be formed, but you still have interest in getting this kind of training, we have developed a curriculum with 3 different academic institutions that you can see in the slide that offer a very similar training at a cost. And this could be online or on-site, asynchronous, or at a certain pre-established dates. We can give you the details of this if you're interested, or you can access directly through those web pages in the slide. In this way, over 1,200 WASP engineers have been already trained since the beginning of the project from a couple of hundred WASP organizations. The third and last service is the access to knowledge products developed during the last 6 years. Technical briefings, different videos, reports, guidelines, a book, all freely accessible at the webpage and thesolarhub.org. To finish the presentation, I will mention that during the last 2 years, we have been also exploring the opportunities that the combination of solar and storage can bring to WASP programs. So combining solar panels with lithium batteries and water pumps, just trying to open new avenues to provide wider services to users and to better manage the water source available, and also better ways to utilize the solar technologies in humanitarian WASP projects. In this sense, we are now running some pilots and developing some knowledge product that will be soon available at the webpage. And if you are interested to know more about it, or you are also developing work on that line, please let us know, and let's explore avenues to collaborate and work together for the benefit of the WASP sector. I'll end up by saying that, as you know, in terms of climate change, energy is to mitigation, what water is to adaptation. And through these services that I just presented, we are trying to make the best contribution from both sides at the most cost-effective possible way. That is all. Comments or questions are very welcome, and thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Alberto. And as mentioned, his email address is available there, so you can reach out to him directly if you have any questions. I'm now pleased to introduce our next speaker and final presenter for today, Paola Roberts. Paola is the Green Procurement Specialist for the Logistics Cluster Environmental Team REC Coalition. She has 12 years of procurement experience in both the private and humanitarian sectors. She currently supports supply chain practitioners by providing guidance and raising awareness on environmental sustainability to reduce waste and greenhouse gas emissions in emergency operations. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for having me here and for everybody who has joined today. So today I just wanted to walk you through some of the resources that we have available that can support you in terms of raising your awareness, providing guidance, in terms of how to implement environmental sustainability initiatives in your humanitarian supply chain operation. So if you can please go to the next slide. So the first resource, well, maybe before I go into this resource, just to mention, all of the resources that we have are open source, so they're available for anyone in the sector. Also, to avoid duplication of efforts, what we do is if we do see a gap in the sector in terms of a tool that might be required and another organization has not developed it yet, then we do create the tool or develop the guide. However, if something has been developed, then we use our website as a platform to be able to share anything that that we identify across the sector. So in that sense, we also look for any examples by other organizations or even case studies that others might be already applying and implementing. And the objective of that is to allow for collaboration and also to learn from others rather than, starting everybody from scratch, because we're all at the same, we all need to address the same type of issues and challenges in terms of environmental sustainability. So we know that the best way is to leverage our efforts across the sector. So the first tool that I wanted to just walk you through today is the Global Digest of Waste Management. This tool provides a whole list or a compilation of the different standards and regulations that humanitarian organizations must consider in waste management when operating in emergencies. So it has all the links, also an explanation of what are these standards and a summary. So it's having in one location anything that you want to look at in terms of minimal standards and regulations that can help you understand how you should manage your waste in the best way possible. If you can go to the next slide, please. This next resource is the Waste or Material Characterization Exercise Guidance. The objective of this resource is to provide you with a step-by-step guide on how to identify what type of waste you have, how to characterize it, or how to, characterize it in terms of a category, and to also determine the quantity. And the objective of knowing what type of waste you have is to then be able to develop a proper waste management system based on the type of waste that you have. So this is also, as I mentioned, available. It has a template as well that you can use, so that you don't have to, start from zero with even developing a template. Next slide, please. This tool is a quick guide on environmentally sustainable procurement. And the objective of this guide is to provide you first an introduction of what green procurement is, and also an overview of what you can do at each step of your procurement process to implement environmental sustainability. So it has a whole overview of the steps. And I would say as an introduction, we do have additional resources in terms of green procurement on our website. However, we chose to have this one here as well, just so that you can have a starting point. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then, as I was mentioning as well, so part of what we do is to identify what is available already to avoid any duplication. So we do have a mapping of trainings that we've seen that are available across the sector for humanitarian practitioners, and that is in this mapping. So this is also something that we maintain as updated as we can. So if we do identify that there's a new training provided by an organization, we include it in this mapping. And it allows you to understand or to have in one place what type of trainings you can access. So we also have some other similar mappings to show who is doing what on green procurement and waste management, which provides, just an overview and to have learnings from others and see what you could also apply from other organizations. And the next slide, please. And yes, just to finalize, so as I mentioned, all of our resources are available on our website, which is, I can actually copy the link of the website on the chat in a moment, but you can also reach out to us because we do provide not just guidance and tools on our website, but we also have help desk support. So if you do have a query, or if you're in a situation where you need some support or some type of clarification in terms of how to do, how to start or how to implement something, you can reach out to us. So that's the email that you can see there. And in addition to that, we also held global information sessions and coordination meetings where we have different people join across the sector to also share what they've been doing. And the objective is that, right, to share that information, to share the learnings, and avoid everybody having to start, from zero. And that's pretty much it from my side. Happy to hear if you have any questions or comments later on in the webinar. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for sharing about those resources. So now that you've had a chance to hear more about the toolbox, the moment everyone in the chat box has been waiting for is the opportunity to access directly the Climate Change and WASH Toolbox. You can access it using the QR code or directly on the WASH Cluster website by following the link in the chat box. So this is a living document. We would encourage you to bookmark the Global WASH Cluster page, as we will be updating the toolbox regularly as new resources come out and as we receive more recommendations and have an opportunity to review existing and newly created resources. And so on that note, I want to mention that in the coming months, we plan to also work with the workstream on knowledge management and other members of the Climate Change and WASH Working Group to build out the toolkit beyond the capacity strengthening resources. So we would like to hear from you what chapters you would like to see in the next edition. So we're going to take a quick poll. Some ideas we have are to build out a section on assessment tools, on climate information services, on monitoring and evaluation tools, on case studies, or whatever you think would be most important. So please take our poll. And then once you have a chance to skim through the toolbox now, or maybe based on what you heard from the presenters, do you think you might use the toolkit? So we'll leave the poll open for a minute. And in the meantime, I also want to note this, as I mentioned, is a live document. We will be updating this regularly. And we encourage you to submit resources for us to review and to look at including it in the next edition. So you can email me, you can fill out our Google form, you can use the QR code to access the Google form. It's a very quick and easy process to recommend resources. We just want to know what the resource is, where we can find it, and if you have used it, how have you used it, just to better understand how people are already using some of these resources. I also want to take a moment to thank the organizations who participated in creating the toolbox, especially those in our capacity strengthening workstream, ProWash and Scale, IOM, Save the Children, and IFRC, under the overall coordination of IOM and the German Toilet Organization as the co-leads of the Global WASH Cluster Climate Change and WASH Working Group. I'd really especially like to thank our interns that we had, Lauren Enoch and Sydney Steele, who helped us immensely in identifying resources and building out the toolbox and bringing together guidance from a lot of different technical experts to make the toolbox possible. So looking from so far, I see there's a lot of interest in the poll on almost all of the new sections, especially assessment tools, climate information services, M&E, and case. So please do look for versions in the future. And it looks like a lot of people are interested in using the toolbox, which is great to see. So now we're going to move on to Q&A, and I'd like to start with a question actually to Farah. You've presented quite a few global resources, and I'd like to hear from you, how can global resources produced by global organizations like IFRC be contextualized to ensure that they're relevant and applicable to diverse settings? What strategies or practices have you used in your own work to help make that possible?
Thanks for the question, Nicole. Well, yeah, so firstly, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you guys again for the workshop and for having us on. With regards to the many resources that are available from many different organizations, many people are working on excellent resources, as we've seen in this toolkit. Contextualization is extremely important. So sometimes you have different contexts within the same country, so the same resource doesn't really apply. So when it comes to global resources or international resources, it's very, very, very important to work with the groups that you have on the field, on the ground, and make sure that these tools are able to be used with the affected communities or the communities that you aim to serve. So when it comes to IFRC, we have the unique opportunity to be part of, or to have 191 national societies in our movement. And that means that we have a global reach. We have this unique opportunity to have almost all of our 16 million volunteers being part of these communities that we aim to serve. So they know the contexts more than we do. And of course, and when it comes to creating new tools or new guidelines, IFRC rarely ever does it at secretariat level. So it's almost always done at a grassroots level from the needs that are identified on the ground that are therefore then translated up to regional offices, national offices, and then to the secretariat, where these tools can then be developed. So when it comes to new tools or piloting new tools, even sometimes we have new tools that we can find from these webinars, for example, or from different organizations. It's never the case where IFRC, someone sitting in Geneva is like, hey, let's try this tool, and then we send it off to X or Y country. So it's always the fact where we reach out to our regional offices and see, does this tool apply to any of these countries that we're covering? And then these regional offices trickle down to national offices. And this is the importance of making sure for the success of the project and to make sure that we reach the people that we're aiming to reach, that all our tools are contextualized.
Great, thank you. So now over to Paula. Where would you suggest colleagues in the field use as a starting point to implement environmental sustainability initiatives? So where should they start?
Yeah, and that's a very, I would say, not straightforward question, but I'll try my best to answer, as helpfully as I can. So of course, it would always depend on how your organization operates, and also if you are, how mature your organization is in terms of environmental sustainability. So for example, if there hasn't been any action that's been taken, then it is definitely key to start by raising awareness, by gaining more knowledge, so capacity building across your own team internally. Because in the end, what we need to think is that environmental sustainability is actually a change management project. You need to change mindsets to be able to drive action, because we're always, we're in our day-to-day. We have a lot of challenges in our day-to-day, especially you know, when we're in an emergency, and we need to try and see, okay, what little steps can we take within that space that we operate, because we cannot change it all at once, right? But if we start little by little, and that's even by understanding ourselves more about the topic, what opportunities there are, then that's crucial, right? And to get the ball rolling. And then you can also start thinking about, even within your own facilities, what can you do there, right? So for example, if you're using single-use plastic, then, you know, avoid it. So instead of drinking water out of a plastic bottle, is there a way to use a reusable bottle? Which are very, you know, small, simple changes, but it's a way to start making that transition. And then of course, what is important to know is that most organizations have the majority of their impact in the products that they purchase. So, which is, you know, the scope 3 emissions, and it's where we don't have most of our control because it depends on the suppliers. However, if you are already looking into that, you know, it's important to start understanding, where should you prioritize? So where do you spend the most? Because at least that gives you an indication of where to focus your time and your efforts. And then starting to see with the suppliers, you know, what alternatives could be implemented. So if it's, you know, buying hygiene kits, for example, and each item in your hygiene kit has plastic packaging that maybe is not required, then eliminate it, right? And maybe that could even make the cost less, because you need less materials. But it's all about speaking to your suppliers as well, to understand where they are and how much they know also about the topic, how much interest they have, and if they have any ideas as well, or alternatives. So I know it's, to be fair, like it's a very you know, broad answer, but I'm trying to maybe just give you a few pointers, right? So just in summarizing is raising awareness and knowledge, walk the talk, right? So start making the changes yourself, and then also start engaging with your suppliers to see what opportunities and alternatives you can look at. I hope that helps.
Yeah, great. Thank you. There's a question there about, have we considered sharing resources from a few different suppliers? I see there's a solar training. There's also climate information services. Just to say, we welcome all these recommendations. Please do submit them in the form. I'm also taking notes, but we'd like to consider all of those ideas for the next edition. We have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask Farah, do you want to share some of the experience of integrating environmental protection with WASH programming in practice? And I know prior to IFRC, you also have a lot of experience from Lebanon Red Crescent Society. So feel free to share from your experience.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so another thing that I touched a little bit upon in the previous slides was making sure that our work in WASH programming doesn't negatively affect the environment. And I know sometimes in some cases it's what they call like an unforeseen or like a negative effect that sometimes just happens because either of it wasn't considered before. We see it a lot of cases with when we come to talk about implementing pits for sanitation or latrines, and then we don't have a plan for what happens when they fill up, or how are we going to ensure that these pits are not emptying into the environment. Just an example. So one of the things that we can do to ensure that we at least make sure we cover all our bases is integrating environmental planning and environmental sustainability into our planning phase, even before we start the project, before we even have a target group, to make sure that our processes are as environmentally safe and clean as possible. Which is something that I know many people and many organizations are already starting to do, and it's becoming a growing concern, which is great. But we really need to make sure that all of these projects that we implement are taking this into consideration. Another thing that we can do, another tool that's available, is a tool called the NEAT Plus, which is the Nexus Environmental Assessment Tool, which basically allows all practitioners, be it from WASH, mainly from, like, it's a big tool for WASH, but other sectors can also use it, be it shelter, be it health, whoever. And it's basically a tool that you run before you start your project that allows you to kind of measure what the impact of this project is going to be on the environment or on the area you plan to implement it in. So this is something very important and something that most organizations, everyone should take it into consideration to ensure that the projects that they're implementing don't have any negative effects. And so yeah, just a little bit on some previous experience. So when I used to work in the Lebanese Red Cross, yeah, well, not a few years back, we started using the Need Plus tool to try and measure the impact of our projects that we might have on the environment. And I'm sure that the team is still doing it to this day. Many of our national societies around the world are using them in the Americas, in Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific. So this tool is very useful. And of course, another thing that sometimes kind of ties our hands is it's a growing concern for donors and partners as well. So now most projects that you want to apply to or you want to approve funding for, they require you to have an environmental section or how you plan to mitigate your impact on the environment. And that is something that should have been done a way long time ago, in my opinion, but definitely it also helps keep things on track.
Great, thank you. So we encourage you to continue to ask questions in the Q&A box as we move on to our next part of the webinar. We have a couple of polls that we would like, again, your input. As I mentioned, one of the goals of the toolbox was to organize what already exists, but we also want to hear from you. What are your priorities when it comes to capacity strengthening for climate change in WASH? What would you like to see our working group focus on in the coming months and years? So please take the next poll question to select your priorities. Tell us the ways you want to learn. And also we want to hear from you any recommendations you have for local or regional partners that might be interested in working with us or being included in future activities or toolkits. So please join us on AHA Slides. And again, our presenters are also still online, so feel free to ask more questions in the Q&A box as we have about 10 minutes left in this webinar. So you can participate in the poll by scanning the QR code or visiting the hyperlink that my colleague has dropped into the chat box. If you are unable to join the AHA Slides, you can always put your ideas in the chat box. If there's any technical issues. If you missed the QR code, you can use the hyperlink. Great. So I'm seeing here a lot of interest in design and implementation of climate adaptive WASH infrastructure. It looks like a lot of interest on monitoring and evaluation when it comes to climate change and WASH, as well as capacity and climate risk assessments and using that information. And then also WASH aspects of water resources. So please continue to vote and we'll move on to the next question. Great. So the next question is, how would you like to learn about these topics? So we want to make sure the resources we're creating respond to your preferred learning and knowledge modalities. And just to note that we realize that these topics are big buckets, so WASH monitoring and evaluation or design and implementation of climate WASH infrastructure is a very large topic. So we would like to hear from you in the coming months. We'll be reaching out to many of you through our listservs to hear more, specifically under this infrastructure bucket, what sort of support you would like from the working group, and similarly on the other topics. I think we can move now to the next question, which is around how can we best support you in your capacity strengthening needs in WASH? Specifically, this group is focused on climate change. So this is an open-ended question. Tell us what you would like us to prioritize in our coming months and years. I see a question in the chat box if we could organize webinars for students and universities. I would encourage everyone on the line, if you're interested in collaboration, please reach out to the working group. And I see Siobhan has shared her email address. And so we can certainly see how we might collaborate on future webinars or knowledge sharing events. Okay, great. So let's move to the last question. And so as you answered this one, I want to also take a moment to thank our presenters. So thanks so much to IFRC, to the Uganda Red Cross, IOM, and REC for being willing to present during today's webinar. I think we all learned a lot about your resources and really excited to look at some of those more closely by using the toolbox and so forth. And thanks again to all of the organizations who participated, who shared resources, and allowed us to include them in the toolbox. I think this will really help us across the sector on collaboration and learning from each other. So before we go, I do want to invite all of you to our next webinar. The next webinar will be on October 16th. It is on exploring climate resilient sanitation, a critical conversation for humanitarians. It is being organized by the Climate Change Working Group of the Global WASH Cluster, the German WASH Network, and the Humanitarian Sanitation Hub. And so I will make sure you have in the chat box the registration link. You can sign up for that. And oops, I think I might have missed an H in that link. But please do follow the Global WASH Cluster LinkedIn group. You'll also be added if you agreed to the listserv, so you'll get announced for future webinars. And really do stay in touch. We want to hear your ideas as we start to prioritize the next activities for this working group. So as you sign off, please do take a moment to give us feedback. We have just a couple of questions at the end here that you can take in Zoom. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.